Hi, my name is Victoria Bard, and I'm the founder of createYES. Welcome to the createYES Summit for your environmental sustainability, where sustainability is about more than just climate change, but also about steps you can take in your life to create change in the world around you. My guest today is Lisa Witherow, and she has been dedicated to helping people find and preserve their health for over a decade. She has a wellness center in Columbus, Ohio, and is currently launching her online resources for people all over the world. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, neurotherapist, and has been focused for the last 5 years on her role as a DNA strategist, educating people about the health implications of their genetics and what their body specifically needs to promote health and longevity. Whew, that's a lot. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. In this summit where I've been talking about environmental sustainability, there's been many different environments that we've explored. And now we're coming to nutrition, the nutrition environment, the brain health environment, the DNA environment. And I find that to be fascinating, especially with my own history with things. But
Sure.
we'll get into things in a little bit. First of all, tell me, what is, because I've heard of functional medicine, but I have not heard of a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. So what is that? Where are you now? We'll start with that.
Sure. Well, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner is really focused on the function of the body and the systems collectively. So rather than looking at the, let's say, one single problem and isolating one system, we look at the full body, very similar to functional medicine. What it does too is using lab work, and then what I also do is look at DNA to understand the underpinnings of symptoms and of how the body functions, and then really work through things like nutrition, environment, any kind of indicators, anything that influences the body, and making sure that we're working with all of the, all of the influences that we have control over.
And you mentioned with the environment, sometimes people are looking at their homes and are their homes healthy? Do you go into that at all with
Yes, it definitely goes into that, because what we find is when we start looking at DNA, there's no one gene that's responsible for an outcome. So it's not diagnostic and it's not prescriptive. What it is looking at what the body's capability is, and understanding sorry for the noise. I have kittens that are deciding to
come out to play.
Yes, they are definitely wanting to play, and they can play elsewhere. But yes, what's really fantastic about it is when you do start to understand what the underpinnings and how the body's functioning and what its capability is, then you know what the environment of your home can be or should be, and what may be causing some problems. So you don't want it to be, where you're kind of oblivious to what's going on and what's causing, let's say, an allergy type reaction, or if you're having stomach issues. If you don't have any idea what is contributing to that, then you're really you feel out of control. But what I like to do is really help people understand how their body functions, and then they're really able to identify what's in their environment that could be contributing.
You're working with people now in this DNA diagnostic realm, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to shift into, how did you get here? You've been working with people for 10 years, over 10 years, you said, and you haven't been doing this DNA diagnostics the whole time. So
Right.
What were you doing before, and how did you even get into helping people with their health and wellness?
Yeah.
Maybe we go a deep dive, even
Sure.
farther back.
Sure. I think it's so interesting because, you know, hindsight is 2020. And if I had, as a child, realized what my path included and how it would, it's just so obvious to me as I reflect why I am where I am and why I do this work. But when it took having a child or when I was expecting my first child to really appreciate what my purpose was, because I always felt that I had a purpose, but I didn't know what it was. And that was very frustrating in my 20s. I just said, I know I'm supposed to be doing something, but I don't know what it is. And when I was expecting my first child, I had a moment. I really was pausing because I was very excited to, you know, be expecting. I was very excited to have a baby. I had been married 8 years, so we certainly had a good foundation. But what I was leaving, I was actually leaving one of my prenatal visits, and I realized that I was scared. I was out of, you know, just out of sorts. And after some reflection, I realized it was because I'd always believed that I would die young. And I couldn't. At this point, that was off the table. That was no longer an option. I needed to be here for my child and future children. And so, you know, I started to dig deeper under that and realized, you know, obviously I would feel that way because my mom died when she was only 29 years old and I was 3. So I didn't really, and she had been sick for the majority of my life. I think I was only 4 months old when she was diagnosed. And she had a very rare form of cancer. She had adrenal cancer. So it was something that I grew up very insecure about health and the stability of even loved ones, having people in your life. And so I think as I got older, I had many experiences, unfortunately. And then, and it ultimately, I just felt like it was out of my control and that I would die young. It was just a given. And I think it was more of a subconscious belief. But when I was expecting my first child, I wasn't allowing that anymore. And so my tolerance just was depleted. And I decided, okay, I need to do something about this. So I focused on what I believed I could control, and that was nutrition. And then after I had my second child, she was 5 years old when they first told me that they believed she was ADD and that she would need to go to a special school. And again, I wasn't tolerant of that. I wanted to investigate other options, and they wanted me to have her assessed, which I knew meant medication. And that was not something I was comfortable with, at least as a first step. And so I really dove in deeply into the brain realm and what was involved with ADD and ADHD and even autism, to understand, again, the underpinnings, what's going on here, what can support the body and the brain. And then I launched my business. I became certified as a neurotherapist, and I launched my business in 2009. And that was focused on brain health. It was peak brain performance. And I have been doing that ever since. And just as an update for my daughter, who's now 17, straight A's, taught herself how to play the piano. She plays the violin. She has been a cheerleader. She has done everything, she, worked since she was 14, things that they said she could never do. So really exciting when you support the body appropriately and you understand how it might be falling down and what you can do to compensate.
So it sounds like you took this information that you were being fed basically by the traditional Western doctor perspective, that here is a problem and this is always going to be a problem and there's nothing you can do about it. This is what we've got, some medication. And you said, nope, that's not good enough for me. And I don't accept that story. That is a story. There can be a different story. There can be a different outcome. And you took that empowered approach.
Sure.
Yes.
And right. Yes. And I think diagnostics are a big question mark for me, because when you think about how you diagnose someone, well, what I've seen as evidenced by even the neurotherapy that I've done and some of the interventions through nutrition and through support, even lifestyle changes and environmental changes, things that we've changed for people when we know their DNA and we know that they don't have the ability to, sorry, my light just went out, to have the ability to do, let's say that the body's not capable of converting a particular nutrient and utilizing it or absorbing a particular nutrient. Being able to understand that, and if you compensate for that shortcoming for the body, and then things change and symptoms resolve. My question is for the when you have a diagnosis, like, where did the diagnosis go? Because that seems to be such a set point that is what you are, and yet it changes. So that's really empowering to me.
You say diagnosis from the Western perspective of, okay, we have ADD here, and it will always be ADD is the limiting box that is typically delivered in this way.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Right. And I would even call it a label, because when they label it as this is your diagnosis, this is what you are and what you'll be dealing with for your whole life. Then when we do introduce some interventions and we start to understand why the body is presenting with those symptoms, and we can resolve that, is that diagnosis legitimate? Or, and it's not to say that the Western medicine is not legitimate, or that we should not go to physicians, because I believe we should, but I think we need to ask a lot of questions, and we need to work with the doctors in a way that is very open-minded in terms of how we can use the information we have about our own bodies to continue to improve things, and to continue to believe in the progress that our bodies can offer.
So let's say a family goes and they get a diagnosis of ADD. Since you brought that up, we'll keep that as an example.
Sure.
So if a family gets a diagnosis of ADD for their child, and I've got the same for mine, and I also am not going down the path of medication because he has enough
Sure.
already for his other conditions.
Sure.
And so let's say someone gets that. So then that diagnosis, while in the functional medicine, functional nutrition perspective, it can change, at least that gives people a starting point.
Right.
They could continue down that path, or they could say, oh, there's other options out there. This is one of them. So let's explore a little bit more about what that looks like.
Right. And I think appreciating what we can leverage in our environment, in our lifestyle, the food choices that we make. And when we understand our DNA, and there is certainly a deep dive. I mean, DNA is not an easy subject, but even knowing a bit of what we're dealing with DNA, and we know, so let's just say with ADD or ADHD, being able to appreciate how the body processes fat, and how the body processes certain nutrients that contribute to brain health, the omega-3s, making sure that the body is able to utilize all of that. Then we reach a point where we can leverage and support what the body specifically needs. And certainly in tandem with the doctors, and in recognizing, what they're looking at and what their concerns are, we can work with them and say, this is one of the things that we are wanting to add, and support and bolster the system. And maybe as a first step. So as people talk about let's say prescribing medication. I'm not against medication, but what I recognize is that we don't have necessarily a deficiency in Adderall or in any particular medication. It's a chemical that's added to offset some function that is not working properly. So, I think that as a first step, we may choose to make some adjustments in what we do have control over, like our nutrition, our environment. Some people cannot detoxify properly. So that's one element that we really look at with DNA is, there are CYP genes that help us detoxify. There are several others as well. But when you look at certain families of genes and you understand the implications of the body being overwhelmed with toxicity, and it might be that you have 4 people in the room and you have exposure to a particular chemical, and maybe 1 or 2 of those people are absolutely fine. They show no symptoms or no concerns with that toxin, but that's how individualized it is, because you want people to be able to recognize, I can't tolerate this particular substance, and here's what I need to do to get it out of my system, or to obviously avoid it if I can. And then that's empowering, because then they know, wow, when I am exposed to this chemical, I get a headache, I get really foggy thinking, I feel lethargic, because the body is internally trying to work on something that it cannot, manage naturally.
So I have another example popping up. Sometimes there are generalizations made for, these are good foods, these are bad foods. And I'm thinking, if you're assessing someone's DNA, it might say that green pepper, for example, nightshades, that's often recommended as not good food for, let's say, the blood type diet.
Right.
I'm blood type A, I should avoid nightshades, but blood type O, maybe they need it. I don't remember which one.
Right.
But for me,
Right.
nightshades are not so good. Doesn't mean I avoid them, because I don't know that that's the only path. But take that for example, or wheat. If people
Right.
may have a wheat allergy and don't know it, or
Right.
they might be able to thoroughly tolerate wheat. Will that type of detail show up in DNA as specific food protocols?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. That what you can look at is you can see how the body is functioning. Basically, think of it as a blueprint. So when you look at DNA, it's like looking at a blueprint of your lifelong home, and you can't move out of this home, so you need to take care of it. But you may see a tangle of electrical wires here, or you may see that the plumbing is less than ideal in the way that it's routed. It doesn't mean that there will be an electrical fire or a flood in your basement. It doesn't equate that way. But what it means is that knowledge can help you lessen the chances of those catastrophic issues by working around them and giving the support, maybe untangling the wires, or doing things that, if that's not possible because of where they're located, you can do things to lessen the load of that electrical flow. So, knowing our DNA can give us insight into how our body functions. And then what we also want to look at is personal health history. We want to look at how the body functions currently. So are there any symptoms currently? Family history is helpful, but I have a lot of clients who have been adopted that don't know their family history. They can even look. Oh, okay. Yeah. And you can even look to, though, your child. You can understand by looking at your child certain areas that you may want to look or may want to consider in your DNA. And so, sorry, I'm just trying to rework this. There we go.
Fine.
Okay. So there are certainly points, because DNA is so broad, you can learn so much from it. Knowing your personal health history, your family history, or your family dynamic by looking even at your predecessors, and then and your current symptoms help you understand where you want to look first, and to better understand your DNA and where to go next.
So it sounds like there are some macro choices you can make and some micro choices you can make based on that genetic information.
Absolutely. And, you know, there is what I would consider to be a common process of looking at, certainly, how does my body process nutrition? Because everybody eats, everybody needs nutrition, and there are certain nutrients that some people need more than others. And so understanding that is going to help you optimize performance. And so that would be one that I would say is kind of a foundational that everyone should go through. Another one is detoxification, which I've already mentioned, because to understand how your body gets rid of the excess or handles even estrogen, and believe it or not, estrogen is considered part of the, you know, how the body detoxes is definitely involved in how we manage our estrogen. And so when we have, if we find that we have a family history or a personal health history of estrogen dominance, and there is an element for me like of cancer, that is a big red flag that I need to avoid xenoestrogens, which can be in plastics. And we want to make sure, like, I, you know, don't use a microwave. I don't use any plastics in a heated food environment. Even like warm soups, I wouldn't want to put in a plastic. Now, some things, you know, when it's takeout, you can't avoid that. So there are ways that you can detoxify if you know you've had exposure, and you can get rid of things like that. But it's boosting the system. So certainly understanding that nutrition, detoxification, and then methylation is probably a third very big area that people need to understand how their body functions, because it's involved in DNA replication and healing and fertility and so many other factors. And that's really how your body manages B vitamins. So those are three of the really core DNA areas that I would want people to know about for themselves.
So tell me more about what methylation is. I have my own idea of what that might be, but
right.
I don't want to put is it this idea out there?
Right, sure.
Because I'm way off the mark. So what is methylation?
Well, it's a complicated process simply because it does so much in the body. But to really make it understandable, it is the process of the methyls coming in through nutrition or through supplementation. So B vitamins, folate, and methyl B12, things like that. Betaine is actually another methyl donor, but having a methyl donor, and then the methyl is transferred to help support a gene function or to help a system work. And if those methyl donors aren't either present in your nutrition or in your supplementation, or your body doesn't handle or manage those methyl donors appropriately, then your body kind of falls down on the job in a lot of different areas. So when we look at fertility as an example, that's a big issue for people with methylation issues. That is something that you want to fix that and address your methylation in your foundation so that your baby is healthy, that DNA replication is successful, that you're able to carry the baby successfully, but also, you know, for your own healing, for your body's ability to manage through that process of giving life to another human being. So there, and so many other things that, you know, it's even involved in when you look at detoxification, methylation is necessary. It's involved in so many things. Yes.
would one analogy be, this is an analogy that's coming up for me, and I want to check in and see if it's accurate.
Yeah.
When it comes to making proteins in the body, I think it's fairly common knowledge that proteins are made from different amino acids. And we talk about complete proteins or getting your complete proteins from different food sources, but it comes down to those amino acids being the building blocks for protein. Is methylation like the building blocks for something else? Is there
Yeah, in a way, yes, in a way it is. It's the methyl donors are kind of like, I would call it a helper, and but it is a required helper. And so it's just this, it's one component. It's almost like a molecule that's necessary to complete the story for this function. And if it's not a complete story, it's not going to function. So things just start falling down. And that's why when we look at DNA, we can't say, oh, if you have this particular gene variant, and there's a lot of terminology here, and I apologize if any of them escape, but a variant is, you have two alleles. If one of the alleles is not ideal, let's say it's not functioning properly, then you have one variant. You can have a total of two variants because you get one from mom and one from dad. You get one allele from mom, one allele from dad. So you could have two variants, or you could have one variant, or you can have zero. So when we get a report, and many people I'm sure who listen to this can say they've done a DNA test, or they've done just for ancestry purposes possibly. When you download that raw data, I don't recommend that people do a report and look at the indicators of red, green, and yellow and make assumptions, because so many people will come to me really upset saying, I'm a mess, my system is terrible, I have all these red indicators, and that doesn't mean it's bad. It just is an indicator that it's different. So understanding those differences helps you, and then comparing those differences to how your body is actually functioning today and how it's functioned in the past. All of those things collectively are amazing insights to what you can do tomorrow to continue your health and improve, and have sustainable health.
You mentioned before the idea of taking essential fatty acids. So if I were to take, which I do, take fish oil as a supplement for brain health,
right?
Maybe I'm wasting my money on the fish oil because my body doesn't actually process it, even though the message is take your take these for brain health, take this for whatever the indication might be.
Right.
So it could be that if I get this test done, I might find out that yes, taking this supplement is going to be great because you process it. Or I might find out that taking this supplement is not the way to go because this isn't working quite right and you need to approach it from a different place. Is
right. That is accurate. And it's, what I don't want to do is misrepresent it though in a way that says that if you were to see your results of your DNA, that would be an automatic understanding. So as an example, I don't process vitamin A efficiently. So if I take a supplement that has beta carotene in it, or I eat 1,000 carrots a day, my body doesn't really utilize it very well. And my body didn't indicate that to me in clear terms until I was 40, and they said, you need to wear contacts or glasses. And so, but when I look at my DNA, it doesn't automatically jump out at me. I have to look at the vitamin A conversion, SNP, as they call it, single nucleotide polymorphism. And the SNP is indicating that my body, I have BCM01 is the SNP. And it says, okay, I have multiple of those that I have variants in, and I cannot appropriately or efficiently convert. So I need to take retinol palmitate, which is what my body needs for vitamin A to actually be received and hit my receptors. So that is accurate. But I guess the reason I'm qualifying that is because I really do want people to understand that going out and getting a DNA test, I do recommend, but making sure that you have your perspective on it and you know that it's not going to be a diagnostic or a prescriptive type test, and it will be a gradual learning process, no pressure. It's something that you can understand gradually and identify what your priorities are, which there are people out there that can help you. I'm one of them, but just being able to understand. And some doctors, I think, are even getting into that realm because they understand now they can even prescribe supplements and prescribe medications based on the DNA instead of just guessing.
Mm-hmm. In other words, what I'm hearing is you want people to have reasonable expectations.
Right.
That yes, there's wonderful information in getting your DNA test, and don't panic when you see the test results in its raw form. The gold in the DNA test comes in the interpretation, the application of some adjustments, and then seeing what your results are.
Right.
Yeah, DNA, you tell me, I think for understanding our DNA, yes, we can map it out far more than we ever could before. But isn't there a whole lot more that we don't know about DNA than we do know at this point?
Yes. And every day there's new research, and that's where the last 5 years and every day continuing, I focus on the research and understanding the implications and where we have leverage points and what we can do about it. It's not to say, there are a handful of indicators in DNA that say, okay, if you have this particular gene, this is something that, from a particular genetic illness or genetic predisposition. But we're talking about 8% of disease is actually hereditary. And even those you can recognize what the gene does. That's what I like to do, is dive into the research of not only what are they continuing to learn about DNA, but also looking at what we understand about our individual bodies. How have we been functioning? What do we respond well to and poorly to in our environment, in our nutrition, and even in our lifestyle, and really leverage what works well for us, because things that are hereditary, we still have some level of control of, helping the body and supporting the body so that we can have the very best health and the longevity, that's what we shoot for, is just have the greatest health and the longevity that, we can promote longevity, because, there are no easy answers as far as, if you have this, you need to do this. But it is exciting to start looking at an individual and appreciate that when you add together all of a person's DNA and their history and all of the factors, you can give them a plan that they feel better, that all of the clues are there. They can really reflect on where they were before they started the plan and where they are today. And all of the clues are, yes, I'm going in the right direction. It's not a guarantee, but boy, does it make things less of a guessing game and less frustrating.
Seems like it's giving you a roadmap, and following that roadmap has some play in it as to how well do you follow the roadmap.
Sure.
And then also how accurate is the roadmap that you're following. It's a bit of information that is in that direction of health.
Right, right.
So I have two examples that are popping up. One is for my child. You're talking about children, so I'll talk about my child for a minute. And the other is a condition. So we'll look at one specific DNA fault compared to, like with Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief.
Right.
Yeah. So in his book, he mentions our thought process as being able to have influence over things like diabetes, over things that, not type 1, but type 2. And there's a lot of people in this country with the standard American diet, or the quality or lack thereof of the food choices that are even available to people in some areas. So diabetes can develop, and I'm thinking that DNA understanding would help in that case. But my child has cystic fibrosis, which is an example, even in Bruce Lipton's book, that if you have that one DNA strand that is faulty, which is, that is not something that the biology of belief can have an effect on for that one condition. So there's two big things I've put in your lap.
Right. So yes, and I think what we look at when we look at something like cystic fibrosis, and we understand that that is a very hard stop when it comes to the body's ability to make changes or to be flexible, for things to change. However, there are other genes surrounding it that are, when it comes to quality of life, when it comes to longevity, if, you know, again, I will go back to my example of throwing my hands up in the air and saying, well, you know, the chips will fall where they may, because look at what happened to both my parents actually died of cancer pretty young. My dad was 53, and I was an only child. So I had no other people to look to say, you know, what do you think? So I just kind of in the back of my mind thought, let's let the chips fall where they may. I don't believe, even with something like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's, that I would want to just throw my hands up. I think I would really like to look at other factors when you understand, even though those are hard stops when it comes to, and I think even beyond the medical community, when you look at some, again, there are about 8% of the diagnoses that are considered hereditary, and that if so, I think Huntington's is if the parent has it, it's like 50% chance that your child will have it. And but there are so many things that you can do to support the body in general, that you know, instead of just saying, I'm just going to eat a lot of sugar, I'm going to do these things, but to understand what contributes in a good way, like you're talking about with omega-3s, with making sure if you have omega-3 sources that you know you're taking in to help support the brain, to help support the myelin sheath. You've got, you know, so many different things that you are contributing to the health of your body overall. It's obviously going to be contributing to a higher quality of life. And, you know, it gives you a much greater sense of satisfaction, I think, because you also feel that you're contributing and not just kind of twisting in the wind and waiting for the next shoe to fall. You know, you don't want to have that constant wavering and feel like you're just up for grabs.
So let's talk about diabetes then, because that is something that we end up developing over time through our personal choices, whether we know we're heading in that direction or not. And I think that it's a very common condition now in the United States. And that condition was brought up in one of my other interviews with the Ayurvedic perspective of how to approach. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to get the functional diagnostic nutrition approach to managing, and the DNA understanding of managing diabetes. So it's not developing diabetes happens over time, but it's not an absolute, like cystic fibrosis, that one DNA, there's your condition. You can
Right.
You can work on other aspects and optimize health, but you're not going to change the genetic piece of CF by
Right.
itself with our current understanding of medicine and DNA. I think it'll come in the future.
Right.
But if we look at something like diabetes or metabolism imbalances,
Mm-hmm.
both would be, I think, similar. Then that will encompass a lot of people. And how do we then look at DNA to optimize and nutritional support to optimize a condition like that?
Right. Well, again, I think when you look at the body as an internal environment, and you can appreciate that there are many factors that contribute from a functional diagnostic nutrition standpoint, we always look to diet, rest, exercise. When you think about, sleep, you've got supplementation options, you have all of these factors that you can utilize. And you look at what your starting point is. When was the tipping point? When you see that your pre-diabetic, type 2 diabetes is looming, and at what age, at what weight, at what have you been eating for the last year or two? What are the environmental conditions? Have you had any exposures that are unique, something new that you've introduced? And I even look from a health standpoint at injuries or, setbacks. People will say, well, I had a knee surgery, and, so obviously their mobility was limited, their ability to exercise and to be active, they became more sedentary. That is a big factor that some people say, well, it was out of my control, so I didn't really think that was important. No, it is. It's absolutely important. And so, and again, if they've had knee surgery, they may still have mobility issues. So we need to work with that individual and
The
identify.
whole person.
Sure. And work with what makes sense for them. We can't give them a, crazy workout routine if that's not something that they can manage. So from functional diagnostic nutrition standpoint, that's really what we look at. Certainly the lab testing to see where insulin levels are, what's going on there. And then from a DNA perspective, what it looks like is, how are sugars handled, from a DNA standpoint, what are the body's capabilities of handling proteins and sugars and carbs, and what's going on. Again, for one person, the kinds of testing that makes sense is different from another. So if a person says, I've had a knee surgery recently, and I was really kind of down and out because I wasn't doing my normal routine. So I was kind of, eating whatever I wanted to and self-medicating through food. That is something that is more of a functional diagnostic nutrition approach than maybe someone who says, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, as I hit 35 or, right around there, I started to feel like my body wasn't functioning as well, and I wasn't optimally processing my carbs and whatever, and of course that requires a lot of self-reflection and understanding. But what we do is, like, I do that health, I have a module that's all about health, determining your health timeline, and it's looking back at factors, and I have cues because people forget. Did you have any kind of dental work? Did you have any surgeries? Have you had any traumas, even emotional traumas? Things that could be the pins that start falling down. And then when they do, that your response to life or your response to a particular, even your stress response may have changed, and that causes. So we're really looking at what are the big factors in all of this.
It sounds like a web. If this part over here, and you follow that one, and then maybe there's this part and you follow that track, and then there's all these other tracks, and maybe they interweave, and it sounds actually rather interesting to track it.
Yeah, it is. And I think for people to understand just the basics, even to start out and say, I don't need to dive in super deep at this point unless they're really symptomatic and they need to resolve symptoms. They don't need to go into it at a really deep level, but being able to understand, again, the nutrition, the detoxification and the methylation, because what that tells us more about is what should I be eating, what should I allow in my environment, and what should I push away. Do I need to do any sort of detoxification to specifically address any concerns? And then with methylation, it's about supplementation and nutrition and detoxification. So it's kind of all three of those joined together. And it's really an exciting opportunity to understand our bodies and have that kind of, control, instead of just assuming that whatever happens, happens.
Nothing I can do.
Right.
It's my body, but I'm not in charge. Yeah,
right.
No, that's an old story.
Right.
You're bringing in a new story where, yes, you do. There is something you can do. You can get more information. You get more information through the DNA. Now, one thing that I've experienced in you talk about giving prompts. So
yes.
I've experienced impact head injury. Had a big old heavy thing hit my head, and I shifted after that. Mm-hmm. My hormone balance, I think, is out of balance because of that. Other things are out of balance, and they're more in balance now than they were. But for a while there, it really took me off center in a physical way and not just a brain health way.
Right.
Do you find that kind of physical injury can create these imbalances from your genetic expression?
Definitely, because what we're looking at a lot of times with brain health is we look at how the stress response, if we're in survival mode, the brain will not be even digesting efficiently because it's not allocating that the time to do that. It's not a priority. It's saying we're waiting for the danger, we're in danger response. So we're waiting for that danger to present and, so that we can run. So we're not giving our bodies an opportunity to rest and digest. And so you've got rest and digest and fight or flight. You don't want to be stuck in either side. You want to definitely have, the constant flow. And so when a head injury occurs, it can, for some people, it can put them in a fight or flight mode. It can put some people in rest and digest and get them stuck in that mode too. And so really looking at what the symptoms are and, how long they've had those symptoms, understanding how the body is reacting in order to get it back to balance. That's the thing, is everybody's a little bit different, and all of the circumstances, sometimes with people who would come in to see me and say that they've had a head injury, it was 2 years ago, and they, the doctors say, well, it just takes time. And it can, but when you start looking at even the most essential steps that I would tell someone who says, they don't have the time to invest in doing a lot of work, or they, don't want to do anything extreme because they're working with their doctor. What I would say is definitely do like a 20-minute period of time every single day where you're disconnecting and you are sitting in a relaxed state. And for some people that means meditation. For some people that means prayer. For others, it may mean just being in nature and just breathing, focusing on your breathing. But ultimately, what the goal of that 20 minutes is to give your body and your brain all the signals that you're safe, you're content, and you're comfortable. Because you want to break free of that stuck point. And if you can get your brain to start to ebb and flow again and go into the rest and digest, fight or flight, rest and digest, and that's throughout the day. When you're eating, you're rest and digest, and then you get gearing up for activity, it's fight or flight. So you want to be able to get back into that flow. And when your brain realizes that it no longer has to stay vigilant, that's when that 20 minutes every day, it can take some time. but it will give you an opportunity to return to a more natural state and flow.
A time to reset the nervous system in a way.
Definitely, yes.
You've talked about, you've worked with many clients. Is there any client in particular that you can think of to bring forth an example? Certainly not breaking any HIPAA law here, but can you take us through someone who is coming, like a specific situation where someone has come in with this situation, you've identified these types of shifts and adjustments and their outcome? I'm just thinking an example of a real example of how much you can change from here to there.
Well, are we talking about when it comes to brain health, since we were just on that topic, or what area are you?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure. The question has come, and sometimes I just go with the question that pops in my head, because I think there's a reason for it that may not be known even when I ask the question. But I'm thinking an example of a person who, whether it was brain health or imbalanced or overweight or diabetes or ADD, or, I mean, it doesn't matter what, but does any particular situation rise to the top as an example of someone who would go to see you, what process you took them through, and how they came out the other side with a truly dramatic or not so dramatic shift? Like a point A to point B example.
Yeah, sure. So one example would be, I have a client who came to me years ago when I was only doing neurotherapy. I wasn't doing the DNA, and then later worked with them with their DNA. But issues of anxiety, depression, high blood pressure was an issue. There were a lot of childhood issues, and there were, in adulthood, there was a divorce, and just lots of experiences that can contribute to trauma, contribute to a lot of even health issues, because that's how we take it on. It just seems like it becomes those layers that impact our health. And it was a female. She did the neurotherapy, and she had really been struggling, and she had done some work, and a lot of work actually. She had read a lot of books, and Biology of Belief is one I know she's read, and so many different avenues that she had taken, but she just felt like there was still a lot that she needed to deal with. So we did the neurotherapy, and she really felt like her depression lifted. She felt more empowered. She felt more balance in her life, more positivity. And then certainly, when one of the things that I notice across the board with my neurotherapy clients is, and I've had many tell me this, and then I've experienced it myself, is just a sense of having perspective, a much better perspective. So what is yours, what is your responsibility, what you can give away and not take ownership of, and maybe even setting boundaries and things like that. It just seems to be a normal benefit that comes with that. So she had that as well, which really gave her a sense of improvement when it came to her emotional health. But there was still something there. And when I started going into the DNA about 5 years ago, I talked to her about it. And I also worked with her from a functional diagnostic nutrition standpoint. We did some testing. I worked with her, using natural things, converting her cleaning products over to essential oils and homemade type products, and doing a lot of things that contributed. And it was a very gradual transition for her. She just moved into some new things, recognizing that her environment was triggering her in some ways. And so then when I did the DNA with her, I realized that some of the anxiety was looking at all the histamine that was accumulating in her system. So when I look at anxiety or a client who's experiencing, symptoms of anxiety, and I understand that there also may be some sleep issues and there may be some other things going on. The first thing I look at is magnesium. Is that something that we could introduce? Because magnesium deficiency is certainly a contributor and can cause problems. But then I look at how many of the foods that you're eating are high histamine foods. And if that's really high, then I want to look at DNA and say, how does your body process histamine? Does the person have seasonal allergies? If that's an indicator, not a diagnostic, how is the gut health, the digestive function, and is there possibly, the intestinal permeability, which just allows for these histamine levels to impact the blood level, so that we have a lot of histamine in the blood. So in looking at that for her, I realized like histamine is a no-go. Like this is something that we can't do. And magnesium was a helpful step too. That was a big one that we did probably about 5 years ago. And then realizing lowering histamine was helpful. And it was just like a, little dominoes that would go down. And then, just having the improvement and feeling so relieved, because the expectation was that this was part of who I am. Again, diagnostics of, oh, well, you have, an anxiety disorder, it makes sense because look at your mom and look at this. And yes, maybe mom had some of the same issues, but guess what? She also had some of the same DNA, and she had some of the same challenges, and the eating habits are also they transition from one generation to the next in many cases. So it makes sense that they would say it's hereditary, but it's not necessarily saying you have to live with this for the rest of your life.
I think anxiety is a wonderful example, because sometimes when people feel anxiety and they go to the doctor and they say it's all in your head, well, it is literally, but not really.
Right.
And it can be disempowering to be told you just have to get over it, or you just have to fill in the blank.
Right. Oh,
and
yeah.
nothing you can do about it, or it's not real. And I've known people who have been told your anxiety is not real because that person doesn't operate in a place of anxiety, so they don't understand that it can be real. And it is real, but it's not real for everybody. But when you are operating in a place of anxiety, it's your physical body response. It's not that you can just decide you're not going to be anxious.
Right. And there are factors. I'll just give you another example that was not in my client's case, but I did look, is how does your glutamate convert? So if glutamate elevates and it doesn't convert efficiently to GABA, which is a calming. So glutamate is excitatory and GABA is calming. If it doesn't convert easily in your body because of a genetic thing, that's another big red flag to say, okay, well, let's address this and see if you feel better. And
so we're talking brain neurotransmitters now.
Right. And it's how your body, again, what is your body's capability of handling these neurotransmitters? What are the feeders? How much glutamate are you getting? What's causing glutamate to elevate? So we can address it from the starting point, but then also can we support the system in the conversion of glutamate to GABA so that you have a much smoother ride and you don't have that, elevation. Again, talking to people individually, when I do the individual consultations, it's asking those questions of, tell me, when do you have anxiety? Is it all day long? Does it seem to increase throughout the day so that at nighttime you're just on fire? Like, where is this? How many years have you been having anxiety? So that gives me a sense of where to start. And certainly even in that first consultation, there can be some hints that I pick up on that I say, okay, let's try this to start. Then we're going to do this test and we're going to do these things. But it's a process. When I do the program, when people come into the group program, it's more of we're going to get our arms around nutrition and detoxification and the methylation. And in that, we talk about things like the histamine. We talk about the symptoms that could arise if you have high histamine. And then, so it's more of a holistic approach, but it's not. The reason I do that group program is it's not as expensive. I want it to be something that people can actually have access to. And it's something that's, you know, gives them a big picture instead of just focusing on one problem and saying, okay, let's fix this problem. So it depends on which direction people want to go.
Well, I think bringing us through that example of the client that came in with all the situations and bringing him through the brain work, the neurobalancing, and then looking at their DNA so that they had absolutely noticeable shifts in the right direction. I think that was wonderful because at the beginning you were talking about a lot of the language and the lingo and the science of it, which is great. It's a great foundation, but now here's a real life example for people who are listening. Oh, I'm that. Maybe this is an approach for me because I've tried all of these other things and now there's this showing up in my, and I think the final piece is that there's hope for anxiety when people have that. Right. Now, you've mentioned your group and the Peak Brain Health. How can people get in touch with you if this information is sparking some ahas for people and they are inspired to want to work with you? How would they find you? Where would they? Yeah. So I have a podcast, so that would be one thing to get more information if they, you know, people just want to learn a little bit more about DNA. And it's the DNA Advantage. And it is on it's on iTunes and all of the different, all the different platforms. So the DNA Advantage, if you look that up on any of the podcast platforms, it should pop up. And then also I have the DNA Advantage Facebook page that you can go to, or Lisa Witherow, you can always look me up on Facebook there. And then that's my page, my business page. But yeah, and it's, I have a website that I'm working on right now. Right now it's just a blog. So the DNAadvantage.com, there's a theme there, I don't know. Yes. But the website itself, what I want to do is create something that actually gives people more information about what I do, because right now it's just a blog. So I have some people working on that right now too. Well, it's a work in progress. Every step of our lives is a work in progress. Right. We're here to evolve. And I really appreciate your coming on to this summit this time because you're going to help people evolve in their genetic expression. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it's all about. The one thing I would leave people with, honestly, is just there is hope. And, you know, I've been in the place where I really felt like there was no direction for me to go. And, you know, I just had to accept certain limitations. And I really want people to understand that there are improvements that they can make for themselves, and just don't give up. Don't accept something as a constant if it is undermining your quality of life or your goals, or your life with your family. So I would definitely, you know, keep learning about yourself and really get to know yourself. Well, I think that's a wonderful note for us to end on, that there is hope. Yes, there is. Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. Oh, absolutely. And people can find you again at the DNAadvantage.com, the DNA Advantage podcast, the DNA Advantage on Facebook, and by looking you up, Lisa Witherow. Right. Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Lisa. My name is Victoria Bard, founder of createYES, and this concludes our session for your Environmental Sustainability Summit for today. Thank you. Thank you.